Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu moves to avoid civil war, delays judicial overhaul plan amid strikes and protests. Ben Wolfgang, Washington Times. Folks, if you're not paying attention to what is going on in Israel, you're not paying attention to what's going on in the United States. I don't care about foreign policy. You better, because let me tell you something. The threats of civil war from the Israeli left, who want to continue to use the courts to destroy Israeli society. Bibi Netanyahu wants to reform the courts to bring them back to some sense of accountability. The left is threatening civil war in Israel. There are defections from the military. They've shut down society. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get to it a little bit later. But don't make a single mistake here in judgment. What the left pulled off in Israel is a test run for the 2024 presidential election.
Dan Bongino is 100% correct. What is happening right now in Israel is of utmost importance to us right here in the United States of America, because I am going to show you parallels between what's happening there right now and what could happen in the 2024 election. And it's downright terrifying. And to be frank, this is one of the most important reports that I have done this entire year. So I'm really going to ask that you listen to it in its entirety, because there could be a horrible price to pay if we continue on this path. But as a quick reminder, please get to restrictedrepublic.com. I started this website because of everything that is happening in society right now. Look, we put our careers and lives on the line to do what we do on a daily basis, and we need your help and support. Right now, we've got an amazing offer of $50 per year. Use the coupon code FOREVER50 to take advantage of that annual rate. But we've got all kinds of exclusive content, exclusive video footage that we post on there that you're not going to get anywhere else. So let's start first with what on earth is happening in Israel, and then I'm going to dive into how that's a test run for the United States of America. You'll probably see a lot of similarities as we go. But for starters, there is massive protests that have broken out in Israel. Take a look at this. This is on MSM.com, and its headline: Historic strikes leave Israel at a standstill with crowds in streets to protest judicial reform. What's going on is large masses of people, tens of thousands, some are claiming hundreds of thousands of people, have taken to the streets to protest Netanyahu's judicial reform. And I'm going to get into that in a moment. But basically, they've got certain industries at standstill, which is pretty much making it hard to do anything in the country. Now, these protests are run by the left. It's not those on the right. It's not the more right people. It is the far left people who are organizing and putting these protests together. And that's a key point. But let's get into the nitty gritty. What are the Israel protests about, to kind of give you an overall direction of this? And this is on theguardian.com, and it's headlined, What are the Israel protests about and what happens next? Well, here's what it's kind of about in the Guardian's view, right? Among a raft of far-reaching proposals from Netanyahu's governments are plans to allow a simple majority of 61 in the 120-seat Knesset to override almost any Supreme Court ruling and to allow politicians to appoint most of the justices to the bench. So that's kind of the overall thing that Netanyahu proposed. He said, hey, let's do a simple majority, 61 of the 120 seats in the Knesset. Simple majority can override Supreme Court ruling. Now, why would he want to do that? Well, the problem is the Supreme Courts have gone completely and utterly to the far left, and they have been on a rampage doing leftist radical things and overturning any and everything they want to. And keep in mind, they are not appointed by the people. Now, on top of that, Netanyahu also fired his minister there, and here it is, CNN. Mass protest erupts in Israel after Netanyahu fires minister who opposed the judicial overhaul. Now, Netanyahu had every right to fire the guy, because the guy, when Netanyahu wasn't around, took to the pulpit and he gave a whole speech opposing his own government's judicial reforms. Of course, the guy should be fired if he's opposing the very thing that Netanyahu was trying to put forward, right? Again, I'm just giving the details here so you kind of see what's going on. Now I'm going to give you a little bit more detail from an article by The Federalist on how the control of the Supreme Courts is the leftist dream, kind of like they have right now in Israel. This is something they want, the radical leftists want here in the United States. Take a look. This is on the Federalist, and they give a really good overview, right? Israel's judicial system is the dream of the American left. It goes on. No constitution, no limiting principles of governance, entrenched leftist judges who get to appoint their own successors in perpetuity, courts that offer arbitrary, expedient, constantly evolving, sometimes contradictory rulings to block laws passed by duly elected center-right governments, an attorney general empowered to bar elected leaders from participating in national debates. Sounds like a progressive paradise. Well, this is the reality of the Israeli High Court, which is likely endued with more power than any other in the Western world. It is not always wrong. It is not always nakedly partisan, but it has power to act as a judicial dictatorship, and it often does. That's the problem with the system in Israel. After Benjamin Netanyahu's government proposed reforming this insane system, procedural reforms that would be in place no matter who was in power, whether it was those on the left or the right, the left acted as the contemporary left always acts when it doesn't get its way. It got hysterical. Cue all the massive protests, right? The mass protests that erupted were hardly spontaneous, though contrary to many reports in the establishment media. Most of the demonstrators were organized by Israelis' biggest unions and edged on by foreigners. Now, this is according to the Federalist, because a less powerful judiciary threatens the center left's power, and that is why they did it. And right now, the High Court is empowered to strike down any law it wants for any concocted reason it comes up with, whether it is protecting the tenets of liberal democracy or not. Therein lies the problem. And this is why, by the way, Netanyahu got reelected and elected into office, because he promised to handle this particular issue. And of course, as the left always does, Biden supports what is going on with the massive protests, supports those on the far left, and is trying to tell Netanyahu to slow it down. Take a look here. This is on Haaretz. Biden Israel can't continue down this road. Netanyahu slams pressure from abroad. Israel's prime minister responded to U.S. President Biden, who said that he's very concerned over Netanyahu's judicial overhaul. Of course, Biden would be concerned because it gives left less power to the left and more equal power depending on who is in charge of the country, right? Then we also have Forbes. Netanyahu hits back after Biden criticizes judicial bill reform. Israel is a sovereign country. Now, I'm not saying that that's the best way to go about it. It's a way that he is trying to go about it to make things better there in Israel. What I'm absolutely against is the courts and the judicial system having that much power to overrule and do anything they want. That is not democracy, and that is absolutely not freedom. And by the way, again, as I stated before, we need to keep it where our election officials are, even in Israel. Now, the other thing is that there were reports that, well, the State Department was funding some of these protests in Israel. Take a look at Breitbart.com. Report: State Department funding anti-government groups in Israel, those that are actually partaking in this, in these protests, right? Now, JP, Jerusalem Post, also came out and said the U.S. is funding Israel's anti-Netanyahu protests. Says Yari Netanyahu, he is the prime minister's son. He's saying that they are also doing it. However, the Biden administration and the State Department has denied that. State Department denies Yari Netanyahu's accusation. It funds Israel's protest. So the State Department is saying, hey, we're not funding these protests. We don't have anything to do with it. Just like they said, we didn't destroy that, Russian pipeline. We didn't fill in the blank. We didn't fill in the blank. We didn't fill in the blank. I don't trust anything they say with a 9-foot stick. Not saying they are funding it or they are not funding it. I have no idea. I'd love to see the facts and more information surface on that. But either way, I don't trust the State Department with a 9-foot pole. Either way, the bottom line here is I do agree with Dan Bongino when he says what's happening in Israel is a dry run for us here in America regarding the 2024 election. If Donald Trump or even Ron DeSantis gets in as president, the left is going to take to the streets just like they did and have before. And they threatened to do in 2020 when Biden and Trump were in there. And there's a really good article that I'm going to leave below that I want you guys to read on that exactly. And here it is, BreitbartNews.com. Pollack says chaos in Israel is a dress rehearsal for the United States if Trump wins in 2024. The chaos on the streets of Israel today is a preview of what will happen in America if Republican, especially Trump, wins in 2024. The left will try to make the country ungovernable. To summarize, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was re-elected last year, and key this part, after he was supposed to have disappeared due to several frivolous persecutions championed by his political opponents. Sound familiar? So just going to hit the pause button right there, and then I'm going to go back to that. Netanyahu was elected again, regardless of the fact that the system, the judicial system, kept going after him with frivolous thing after frivolous thing after frivolous thing, kind of like Donald Trump now, with 3 different potential indictments going on. I believe it's 3. But the article goes on to state, when Netanyahu got back into office with a bigger majority than he had before, he vowed to take on the forces that conspired against him, basically his own deep state. It goes on, in the 1990s, the Israel Supreme Court began to assert powers to overturn legislation and review executive decisions. It did so more and more brazenly. Therein lies the problem over time. The judiciary, which effectively controls the appointment of judges, became a bastion of left-wing power in Israel. So that is the problem. The juristocity caused many Israelis, particularly those on the right, to become frustrated with democracy, because what use was there to voting for a government, after all, only to see the courts overturn everything you voted for. That is why Benjamin Netanyahu got elected into the system, and then bang, just like that, Israeli streets exploded into protest. And by the way, the trade unions kind of effectively shut a lot of things down. It shut down the universities. It shut down some of the, I believe, flights as well. But you're talking about completely taking a city and shutting it down overnight because of these massive protests. Well, I believe, and so does the author of this article, that this is a huge warning for us here in America, and for 3 reasons, he goes on to note. First, it is deeply worrying that the Biden administration seems to be fomenting the chaos, right? Second, the crisis in Israel is a risk to stability because of the Middle East. They're still fighting with Palestine. And third, and most important, what is happening in Israel is a preview of what may happen in the United States after 2024, right? So 2024 could be the key here. And it's a terrifying thought to think the leftist radicals are always watching, and they're watching what's happening in Israel. And I believe they're going to take that card and do everything in their power if a Republican gets into office. So we need to make sure, I don't even know, but I mean, if we already have laws, thankfully, against any kind of violence happening in this country. But I think we need to be ready and start thinking ahead to 2024 if and when Donald Trump or a Republican or Ron DeSantis gets in. They have shown us in the past here in America with, some of the riots that they have done in the past, how eager they are, maybe not eager, but how much they went ahead and burned cities, burned businesses, and then they got money. Not only were they bailed out by the likes of Kamala Harris, who actually did bail out some of those people. But on top of that, they got slaps on the hand, they got released. And even in some cities, they're giving money to the protesters of, say, like George Floyd. I mean, this is insane. It's almost as if they're being encouraged here in the United States of America, and the other side is getting highly prosecuted, QJ6 versus some of the other protests and riots that we have seen. But either way, I think we need to watch and see what's going on there. Take a look at what it looks like for our future here in America. And this is why I said it's a very important report. Anyhow, I love all of you. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Lisa Haven signing out.